So hello everyone and welcome to another episode of our leadership podcast where we explore some of the most important and relevant themes shaping today's organizations. Today we have two very special guests who will guide us through two powerful and timely concepts in leadership, authentic leadership and servant leadership. With us is Professor Milton Sousa from Nova School of Business and Economics, known by his work in servant leadership and his broad academic and practical experience in the field, and also Professor Hannes Leroy from Rotterdam School of Management, whose research focuses on authentic leadership and how leaders can remain true to themselves while navigating complex organizational environments. So let's deep dive in this amazing conversation, and I would like to start with you, Hannes. One obvious question is, how do you define an authentic leader in practice?
Yeah. It's not an obvious question, and this is actually the subject of debate, I think, for decades now, right? Philosophers have thought about what does it mean to be authentic, from all the way from Socrates to Heidegger to Sartre. I don't recommend anyone to read all the philosophers because you can get easily confused there. But what I've taken away from it, the most simple way that I understand this is what you say and what you do, is that aligned? So do you walk your talk? Do you practice what you preach? Realizing that how you define that for yourself, right? You try to stay true to your values, but then also do others observe you to stay true to your values, right? So that would be the simplest as I can define it.
Let me ask you something about your research. So what are the main risks or misconceptions about authenticity in leadership? Can someone be too authentic?
Oh, yes. And I won't name any names, but I think we can all immediately think of one or other person who's maybe just a little bit too authentic. And we often give this advice, whether it's the first day of school or their first job interview, just be yourself. Seems easy enough, seems straightforward enough to just be yourself. But that might actually be a recipe for disaster. If you're not aware of yourself, if you don't understand how yourself comes across to other people. So I've stopped using this advice of just be yourself. I've started to use the advice, be yourself, but not too much. And I can explain later what I mean by that.
Milton, let's talk a bit about servant leadership, which is your field. What sets the servant leadership apart from the traditional leadership models and styles?
Well, it's probably the one style that emphasizes more obviously the importance of caring for others and caring for the people working in your team. So it tends to put people first, even above and beyond the organization. And the benefits that come to the organization are a consequence of what you do to allow people in being at their very best. There's also two particular behaviors, you could say, that are very unique or very salient in servant leadership. One is humility, and the other one, I would say, is stewardship. Is this idea that as a leader, you have to make sure that you emphasize the overall contribution that you are delivering for others. This idea of being in the service of others is very much part of the culture and the mindset the leader tries to create.
Let me just challenge one of the words you've just said, humility. Yesterday we were talking about it. Can you remember the? It was
what I
very
said
interesting.
Well, there might be a challenge with the word humility, right? It sounds like also the verb to humiliate, right? And so in certain contexts, I think people have been taught humility, right? And so I that's why I sometimes, I like the word humbleness.
Humbleness,
to differentiate, to make sure that people don't feel like they're being put down.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
But
that's for sure something to be mindful of.
That's not what you meant, but
no.
yeah.
Actually, the way and the reason why I still use the word humility is because actually the etymological origin of the word combines two words, which is earth and feet. And literally is to have your feet on the ground, to be connected,
nice.
to be grounded.
I like that.
So in that sense, using the original word might be useful. On the other hand, you need to be sensitive to cultural interpretations of humility and humiliation, which I actually sometimes when I challenge people where it's coming from, they often indeed very quickly hear the word humiliation, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
So agreed.
Yeah.
Milton, can someone serve as a leader and still maintain the authority and influence with the teams and community?
Absolutely. I think that's also sort of a misconception that people often, when they don't know enough of the concept they may have, is that servant leadership is this sort of soft, wishy-washy, new age approach towards leadership where anything goes. It is a servant leader, right? It's not just a servant, right? So what is important is to ensure that in terms of your motivation, your drive, is really about making sure others are at their very best. And that also involves more traditional leadership aspects that are, of course, obviously necessary. Even Robert Greenleaf himself at some point mentioned that one of the things that, which is, Robert Greenleaf is one of the originators of, or the main originator of the concept, at least the way we study it. He said one of the things that bothered him a lot is people with a servant heart, but not with the motivation and aspiration to lead. And that leadership involves courage, accountability, setting vision. It's also part of leadership. So it's not like we gave up on that, but it's making sure that you do that with the purpose of allowing people to be at their very best.
Nice. Let me ask you both. So you're talking about authentic leadership, you bring into the table the servant leadership. Is there any type of relationship between these two different concepts? Do they clash? There is any type of overlap? How do you see both the relationship between these two different concepts?
I think they support each other quite well, actually. And I think in both writings on servant leadership and authentic leadership, we often make reference to the other concept. But to the untrained eye, yeah, there might be a danger of seeing a potential clash, right? So an untrained eye may say, oh, servant leaders, that sounds like you're patronizing or matronizing people, right? You're the leader and you're taking care of the needs like their kids. And that would be completely the opposite of authenticity, which is, no, cultivate an environment where people can be themselves. But that would be a misconception of servant leadership, right?
Absolutely. And actually, 2 quick notes on that. Going back to Greenleaf's comments as well, he actually mentions that the ultimate test of whether you are actually behaving as a servant leader is whether people that work for you or with you are themselves becoming more autonomous, more authentic, more themselves, and more servants themselves. So in a way, it's very similar to what we're trying to do here. It's like as a servant leader, you're trying to invite people to be their true selves, if you can say that, or as close as possible to their true self. So I think the end game is pretty much the same. Maybe the emphasis will be different, and actually authenticity is even part of various models, specific models in terms of behaviors. I think maybe in the way you kind of articulate the 2 concepts might be different, but I think they revolve around very similar principles.
I think, as Milton explained, right, servant leadership is the primary focus is on other people, right? As an act of leadership to be there for others. I think authentic leadership often starts with the person of the leader themselves, about gaining more self-awareness, being honest with yourself, gaining some of more of that humbleness that we talked about. And I do think that creating that basis is then a good step forwards to then be a servant leadership, right? Start with yourself and cultivate that authenticity. And from that authenticity, you'll be an even better servant leader, I would argue. But I don't know if you would agree with that.
I fully agree. And also, I think a side note here, I think is important to mention that while we agree in terms of the broad approach of an authentic leader being consistent between what you say and what you do, and also the servant leader putting people first and being mindful of that, caring for others in a very authentic way. The truth is also, of course, that reality is complex. There are situations where it might not be always that obvious to determine what being authentic means. Also, in terms of service, you may be confronted with situations where you have to opt between serving those you currently work for you versus serving others. They may one day be working for you and also others around the organization, the community. So it's not always that trivial and that obvious. So you need to use judgment. And there's another element, which is situational leadership. And sometimes in a moment, say in a crisis, for instance, being a bit less authentic might actually be helpful for those you're trying to serve. So it's complex. And this is why we do leadership development, right? So otherwise it would be so simple and trivial. So no matter how much science you put into this, it remains an art and it remains a field that you have to personally explore and develop as a leader.
So taking the advantage of having two very important and interesting professors on both fields, what type of actions, behaviors, habits should a leader adopt to develop these two different approaches, authentic leadership and servant leadership?
Hannes, maybe you'd like to start, I don't know.
To some extent you could say like, well, is it really that hard, Hannes, to just be yourself, right? But as I said before, authenticity is not as easy as just being yourself. And in today's crazy world, and I intentionally say crazy because we are running from one thing to the next, and there are so many things constantly grabbing our attention. And in this crazy world, it is easy to what I call passing yourself by. You run, and you forget sometimes just to be or to connect with your emotions, with your body, right? It goes back to this being grounded. And so one of the most simple ways is to just every now and then stop. Stop, take a moment to kind of check in with yourself. And whether or not you want to use meditation or mindfulness to do that, that's one option you have. Maybe you want to go surfing, right? And that's your way to be grounded in the water then. But everybody has their own technique. Some people use art, right? Art helps to ground them. So find your own way to build in those moments of grounding. Because again, I think in society, we used to have more of those institutional ways of grounding ourselves. Be it in spiritual ways, be it in religious ways, right? We had kind of collective moments where we would sit our ass down and have a moment of reflection. Even if you didn't listen to what was happening, you just sat your ass down and you were able to ground yourself. And we've lost that capability. So to every leader out there who's searching for a little more authenticity, I would say, take small moments to ground yourself. And then every now and then do a spring cleaning. Really disconnect. Go on a retreat. Go out there. Really kind of fundamentally revisit yourself, revisit your purpose. It's very common for human beings to do that.
I mean, it should be. I'm not sure if it is a common thing, but I do relate with that. I don't see many leaders, especially from middle and top management, doing it by purpose. Sometimes they follow others, and it's just for a chance. But I don't see leaders doing it systematically, and they should.
Well, I see it, I do a lot of leadership development, right? And of course, leadership development is supposed to create better leaders, and we have all sorts of skills. But what I often find is giving these leaders an opportunity to just disconnect and don't let the mill keep on going, but just that, okay, who are we? What am I doing? Why? It gives them that space for change, and it's very precious to them.
And just to double down on that, I think there's some interesting research actually showing that if you practice with mindfulness, I know it's a dangerous word.
Yeah, these days.
But let's say being present, even if it's just 5 minutes of breathing. And some interesting research showing that when you are in that state, you actually are able and more capable of empathizing with others more easily. So actually by being present, you're more sensitive to the emotional cues of others, and that will allow you to actually be more serving, if you want, as a leader, and more also aware of your own emotional turmoil and how you react. I think it would be very important. If it's just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I think that's critical.
Can I give you an example of that?
Course.
So this is how I try to practice servant leadership. I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I try. I noticed that if I'm in the rustle and bustle of every day, I'm not a very good servant leader. So I have a few things. When I really try to serve and be there for others, I either put on a baseball cap because I'm in a coaching mindset, or I put on a fuzzy sweater because I'm trying to be warm.
really?
Or I get in like a telephone booth or like a quiet space where my attention is not distracted, where I can be fully there for the other person. And so anyone who's listening to this, I would advise you, find the thing that works for you. To make that transition from the craziness of everyday life to really be there in a servant and authentic leadership role for others. It could be anything. It could be a pin, it could be glasses, whatever you want.
I like that very much, like something that primes you into that mode, right? And I think, just if you allow me just to continue then on your question, because I had a few things while you were talking as well that I think came to my mind. One of the things that we found out by interviewing and talking with people who have this servant attitude is that they really privilege one-on-ones, and they plan, and they're very disciplined and very deliberate in creating moments where they have individual conversations with everyone in their team, but without agenda. They allow others to talk and express their own feelings and thoughts, ambitions, concerns, doubts. So where the leader is literally there to serve and to listen and to help people from where they stand rather than from where the leader stands or the organization. That's a performance appraisal, which is not what we're talking about here. So that's a very important one. But what we see is that these guys really are very religious almost about these moments, because everyone talks about having those, but these are the first ones to go when there's something happening, right? So they make it really top priority, and they have regular moments like that. A second thing I would invite leaders to do is what we call perspective taking. There's a really interesting article published a few years ago titled, "Serving You Depletes Me." And basically means the more you tend to serve, the more it drains you, because it's tiring. And you may end up with this well-known phenomenon of compassion fatigue, right? It's like you're giving, and it's really hard to sustain that engine. And the motivation to lead eventually will decline unless leaders practice with this perspective taking. What does that mean? You put in a conscious effort in paying attention to those around you, those you're serving, to see how they're progressing and to notice the impact of what you're doing. So there's no pure altruism without reciprocity, without any form of feedback. It's going to be hard to sustain that. And the second thing they found out, which is quite interesting, is a culture of gratitude helps sustaining that. So saying thank you, an authentic thank you, will be important every now and then. So I think that's important. Pay attention to those you're serving. See how they're growing and progressing. That will be quite rewarding. And the final piece is to surround yourself also with people who dare to challenge you. And that goes with the humbleness perspective. It's very easy to fall into the trap of surrounding yourself by people who agree with you. Having the courage to have people say, "Well, I don't think I agree with you," and respecting those voices, I think, will be very important. So I would say these three very practical.
No, that's very interesting. I do relate with the one-on-ones action, and you're absolutely right. Sometimes leaders take it off when they don't have the time for it. But it's very interesting to see the reaction from team members. They value so much those moments that probably something that have a huge impact on culture. And let me make the last question, which is actually about the culture. So how do you feel that authenticity, the authentic leadership and servant leadership can really impact the culture, organizational culture, in a very positive way?
There's so many things. There's so many things. Maybe I'll start, and then maybe you can close it, maybe with the authentic piece. Here's what I observe, and the research we have seems to show that servant leaders, I think, create a psychologically safe environment for people to speak up and to participate and to learn, right? So I think there's a very tight relationship between the idea of servant leadership and a psychologically safe environment. And I think in this time and age where you need to innovate so quickly and learn quickly, that I think is an obvious one, I would say. Because a fundamental part also of servant leadership is forgiveness and your ability to forgive others for their mistakes, which is not, errors of character are different, right? Lying and being corrupt. But errors, honest mistakes where people try their best, I think is very important. And the second part is I think the purpose and being mindful of why we do what we do. And this is where the stewardship comes in. So on one hand, empowering learning cultures, on the other hand, purpose-driven cultures where you are always seeing your work and yourself as it being in the service of others. That's part of the mindset that servant leaders try to create. So purpose is a very important piece in the culture of a servant leadership approach. That's my take.
Yeah, I think I could add to that from an authenticity perspective. Look, if we take in our lifetimes, the amount of time that we work, right? Somewhere between 20 and 70, right? Let's leave a little bit of room there depending on which country you're in. The majority of your time is actually not going to be spent with loved ones. The majority of your time is going to be spent with colleagues. So imagine for a moment that you're in an environment where when you enter the door of your building, that you have to leave a part of yourself behind. Right? The whole chunk of yourself, like, oop, okay, now I put on a costume or some sort of uniform and I become a different person. That does something to a human being in terms of their own well-being, and most importantly, does something to their intrinsic motivation. We know when what we do is an extension of who we are, it kind of flows naturally. It comes easy, it feeds into our well-being, and for the organization or for the leader's perspective, well, you would want that, right? Now you don't have to motivate the employee anymore. They're doing it because it's just a natural extension of who they are. So yeah, if you ask me, would I want to work for an organization that allows me to be myself? Yeah, that sounds like a good deal.
But sometimes it's not easy.
How do you mean? What do you have in
I
mind?
work with a lot of companies that people report that they don't feel that they are themselves. They need to wear the costume to adapt to the organizational culture, to their bosses, to their role. So they need to adapt their natural behaviors into something completely different because of the culture. And my question is, it's the culture, is the leader, is the role. What are the variables that actually make people need to adapt to a different person?
Can you repeat the last question and just make sure I got it?
What are the variables that make people to change their natural behaviors into something else when they are working in the company?
I mean, and I think Milton might agree here. We know that human beings have what we call basic psychological needs, right? So whether it's at home or at work, they want to feel like they're connected. They have a sense of belonging, right? That they feel like that they're one of the team. A sense of competence, right? They want to feel as though they're good at something, right? And they want to have a sense of autonomy, a sense of like, I can be myself, I can do things my own way. Now, the reason I mentioned those three is if you start frustrating one of those, if now you feel like I have no sense of connection here, I feel incompetent, I feel like an idiot, and I can't chart my own path here, I'm just frustrating those needs pushes people away from authenticity and from that culture. So as leaders, as organizations, if we can keep our mind on satisfying those basic psychological needs, I think we'd go a long way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I have also three to you.
Okay.
So I think leaders should focus on three things when they are leading with more authenticity, serving leadership. It might be strange to say the first one, which is rewarding and recognition.
Yeah.
The second one is development, because if we as a leaders, we should have a responsibility to prepare people not only for their current and future roles in the organization, but even after they leave the company. We should be responsible for their lives, even if they leave the company. And last but not least, love. Whatever you want to translate love. Can be professional realization, can be satisfaction, whatever. So reward / recognition, long life development, and love.
Which actually
well-being.
connects very well with what Hannes was saying. The love, the belonging,
the
the
community.
developments, and the recognition is part of feeling competent. But I think you're right in the sense that this is not an easy game, right?
Of course.
As much as you're trying to create an environment where people can be themselves and be at their best, I mean, things are what they are. Not always there's a clear alignment, not always is even possible to have full freedom for you to be yourself. And of course, that's part of life. I mean, even at home, when you should be totally at ease, you have to find compromises with your spouse, with your kids, with your extended family. So that's part of living in a community and being able to find a good intersection between who you are and what others are trying to do. And it's a continuous process of negotiation. But even there, being authentic and allowing people to express that, I think is very important. But also not being romantic to the point of thinking that you can just allow anyone to be whatever they want, whenever they want. That's impossible, right? So I think and I like these two approaches because there's an implicit idealism to it. But leadership by the end is also pragmatism, and you're realizing what's possible, what's not. So this is where the art comes in again, right?
Yeah.
You stay true to these principles, realizing that reality is what it is, and we need to deal with it every day. And I think it's more about the intent and nudging the culture in the right direction than being that perfect state of,
I agree with that, but I think we sometimes forget that there is skill. There's skill involved with servant leadership, there's skill involved with authentic leadership, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about perspective taking and how important, that is a skill you can learn,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to authenticity or authentic leadership, I can teach you something or something called political skill. And as it turns out, political skill is a really natural complement to
Absolutely.
To authenticity and authentic leadership. So, I love the art metaphor, but sometimes the art or the intent, and then people think like, oh, it's just good to have the right intentions. No, you need to be skillful.
I agree. No, absolutely.
Okay,
And the political savviness is something that is critical. And I think a lot of idealists fail to understand that political savviness is critical to get anything done.
Absolutely.
And they'd be willing to go for that fight and to have these sort of conflicts permanently and mediating those conflicts. I think is very important.
Because the idealism, I think, is one of the biggest dangers, actually,
Absolutely.
for both authentic leadership and servant leadership. That people sign on to it as an ideology because it aligns with their personal values, and they don't even hear the science behind it or the skill behind it.
They become romantic.
And they become romantically obsessed with it, but not skillful in delivery.
Absolutely.
And that's where it really gets dangerous. And we need to, collectively as a society, we need to avoid that, because then the concept of authentic leadership or servant leadership is hollowed out because people are like, well, I don't want to associate myself with that.
And in this time and age, we need that political savviness to counter what we see out there as sort of simplistic approaches towards leadership that are the total opposite of authentic and servant leadership. I think we need to have authentic and servant leaders who are pragmatic and ready to go for the fight.
I like that word, pragmatism. I think I'm
Good.
going to remember that.
So let's close the conversation. So as we wrap up the conversation, I want to thank you, Professor Milton Sousa and Hannes Leroy, to join us at the Futurecast of Nova SBE, and hopefully we can see you together very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you.